Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of DC Stargirl. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we get that opening with Johnny and Pat both being relegated to the bench. You know, it's like, because I even love the whole thing with Johnny being like, Thunderbolt on paper is stronger than Green Lantern, Flash, and all of them combined, but in my hands, all it is just another mess for the ISA to pick up, to clean up, you know? Because also Pat's like, yeah, I get it, like getting relegated to like the bench. It's like, yeah, it's kind of a blow to the ego, but he's like, I know whatever Sylvester like is just deciding to do, like I know it's for the best. So, but I think that was probably like the last time. It was 11 years ago, as they said, so that's like before everything went down. It's like, yeah, they caught Solomon Grundy, and it's like, Pat, you stay here, you got a kid to look after. That's kind of sad to knowing that's like the last time you saw everybody before everything like really went down. But it's interesting. I guess Pat never really, well, I guess he realizes it, but I guess he just never really realized it. Just of how much like he's kind of benching Mike is just like what happened with him. He was kind of benched a lot. He was allocated to just being, you know, the sidekick. And obviously argument could be made that he's still kind of playing that role, but he never really complained about it. He still always felt part of the team. The sad thing is Mike doesn't. I mean, especially because he came back with his shirt ripped. Everyone's so focused on the Shade situation, which I love. It's like Barbara's like, why don't you bring Stripe? And she's like, really, Mom? Like, he's as subtle as like a tank. And it's like, well, does it have stealth mode or something? And Pat's like, actually, that's a really good idea. And she's like, come on, Mom. It's like, invisibility? And she's like, come on, Mom. You're embarrassing yourself. But it's like, yeah, he comes back and no one really notices. It's like, yeah, the Shade stuff, you don't have to worry about it. Just like, without even realizing it, like, Pat's kind of being very dismissive. And it's like, oh, okay. I mean, I'm sure it's also like, because Mike already had that issue kind of in season 1 of like, oh, like, Pat's my dad, yet he's really close with Courtney. That was kind of like one of his big issues last season. It's just kind of like, yeah, he's my dad. You have your mom. But it's like, right, he's kind of moved past that, and it's like, we are a family, we're a team. But then it feels like, right, I'm still on the outskirts, you know, because now it's like, right, Barbara, Pat, and Courtney are focusing on the Shade thing. I'm told not to worry about it. So he accidentally stumbles across the pen and discovers Thunderbolt, which I think he plays a genie type of role, but he also kind of plays almost like a trickster, like Loki type of thing, which I love. It's like, right, you activate him by saying the words so cool. He's like, whoa, word, because it's like from his language, and it's like, oh, where's that place from? He's like, well, it doesn't exist anymore on any map. Thanks for bringing it up. But basically he was saying it's a synonym for, or it is synonym or synonymous, I think he said synonymous with the sound of like a screeching chalkboard. He's like, yeah, and I like that sound. But it's like, yeah, I can make any wish come true type of situation. Also, because he is a genie, it is that go-to of like, hey, be careful what you wish for type of thing. And you also have to be very, very specific. Very interesting timing with the whole theming of be careful what you wish for. That's come up most recently with a certain trailer that's dropped fairly recently. I thought it was kind of interesting. I mean, because even Pat references it like later on in the episode, like Monkey Paw, which like obviously the reference kind of goes over Mike's head. But it is a thing of like, right, he's like, I want to be taller, and it's just like all he did was teleport Mike on top of a bench, and he's like, you should be glad, like body like adaptation, like body changing like that never works well. I'm like, I wonder what ways did it go wrong. But also your classic genie things of can't wish someone dead, can't wish someone back from the dead. He's like, the one time someone tried, we didn't hear about that, but I'm like, what happened? So I'm wondering, I'm sure like I'm curious, are they like your genie from Aladdin like rules of I think those typically flow across. I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure he's more genie than Jen. I wonder, does he borderline? But I thought it was interesting, like, you know, Mike wants to, you know, has to be very careful about what he wishes for and everything. So he ends up finding those guys who beat him up, who are literally stealing Girl Scout cookies from a little girl. And even Mike being like, a little girl? That's worse than usual. Even I'm like, really? You want to steal candy from a baby next? I mean, it's almost the same thing. You're just like one step away from doing that. I'm like, that's some like old school. Like, come on. She's just like, no, I'm not going to give you any free cookie. I'm like, oh, come on. How can you say that to that such adorable little face? Like, how can you like steal from that little? I guess it's just like, right, to show you just how terrible they are. So it's like, right, I wish they would stop. And it's like stop signs keep falling. At first I was like, are you actually summoning those stop signs? Like, are they like actually magically popping into existence? Or are you stealing those from somewhere? Because I was about to say, like, are those going to end up being like the stop signs from all across Blue Valley? Or are that's just like, no. Those are just magically created stop signs. Like, also makes you wonder, who's going to have to clean that up? Because I wonder, I know the show Powerless dealt with like I might have brought this up before. Like, I know in the show Powerless, there were the people that like helped. I don't know if they dealt with like the cleanup in the DC universe, because obviously, like you said, Marvel's got their equivalency to it. I always forget what they're called. But they're the people that show up when superheroes like make a mess in the city. It's like, right, we're the one that cleans stuff up. Because like I said, I know they've only popped up in the movies like once. They popped up in Homecoming, but I'm blanking on their names. Like I said, I don't know if there's a DC equivalency to them. But I'm curious, like, or did they just go, Mike, you're gonna have to wish all that away? It's just like, we just kind of skate over that, but it's just kind of like, there's a whole bunch of stop signs. Someone's gonna be like, what? Why is there a stop sign through my car? Some rabble-rousers up here throwing around stop signs like it's nothing. But I like how jokey Thunderbolt is. I also love the fact that he was like, oh yeah, like, most people, like, I try not to show myself to humans because most times they, you know, some excited, others kind of panic. I mean, there was one guy that, like, almost, like, had a heart attack because of it. I mean, he's fine. I mean, actually, I don't know. I mean, to be fair, he was old, so probably not. But obviously, Pat finding out about it, not too happy, when it turns out, when it's revealed, like, okay, like, give me the, because he's like, I know how dangerous it is, even in Johnny's hand, how dangerous it was, and so he tries to take the pin, but every time he tries to take the pin, it goes back, because it chose Mike. You know, he hasn't had a new partner since Johnny, obviously. And then obviously him and Pat talk. He's like, oh man, you actually built it. When he sees Stripe, he's like, man, if Starman actually seen this, he would make you like you'd go from sidekick to like senior sidekick, or I don't know. He'd be super proud of you. But it's like, why did you choose Mike? And it's because it's like, right, you know how this works. I'd have to pick someone that's like me, you know, alone. And it's like, wait, is that how Mike feels? He's like, well, yeah, at least right now he does. I was like, even Pat was almost like, whoa, now that was depressing. Also to know that that's what it is. That's how he picks a partner. Like, why it hasn't worked till now. It's like, if you're alone and lonely, like, that's like, yeah. It's like Johnny's final wish for me was, because Pat was like, I never did hear his final wish. He was like, yeah, he wanted me to go, he wished for me to find a friend. And I was like, oh, that's actually like a little heartbreaking and sad. But also now it gets context of like, oh, why Johnny felt like, right, I'm kind of like the mess that the JSA always has to clean up. Because, yeah, it's powerful, but, like, it's, once again, you have to be very specific about your wish. Because at the same time, the group had learned about the Shade. We never really got into it. I'm curious, well, because he talked about it a tiny bit, but Pat brings up the fact that the last time the Shade worked with the ISA was when they took out the JSA. After that, he split from them, and he's never been... So he's not here to finish what they started last season. It's like, he has no interest in that. But it's like, the way he talks about it, it's like, basically, their ambitions... It's kind of like, right, we're not birds of a feather that flock together. Never have been, never will be. But it's just that it was... When our interests overlap, that's the only reason. Because also Beth learns from Pat, it's like, right, he's the one that killed Dr. Midnight, which all we did was see him get dragged away. He might not be dead. He might be like in some like shadow realm or something. Or maybe straight up dead. I don't know. Well, because the way later on the Shade was like, I'll say this in the nicest way possible, you don't know what you're talking about. I guess it's like he didn't kill Dr. Midnight. Because the whole thing about the Shade is like he doesn't age. So part of me was wondering, like, is the Shade kind of like not a... Is it not a... Maybe it is just one person, but I was wondering, like, could it be that the Shade's an entity itself that, like, possess his body. Like, I know I'm going like crazy out there, random theory. I'm like, could that actually be Chuck just looking like what the Shade looked like years ago? Like Richard's, like how he looks now. It's like maybe the Shade like is actually Chuck. Maybe it's Chuck's mind, and the Shade manifests itself to always look like that. But maybe it takes people's soul, and so maybe Chuck's soul is there. I don't know. I mean, like I said, I'm jumping to major conclusions, but for him to be like, you don't know what you're talking about, makes it sound like Chuck didn't die. Like he did, I don't know, maybe he dragged Chuck away, but someone else killed Dr. Midnight, you know? I don't know. Maybe that's what he's kind of implying, because that was the last thing Pat saw was him getting dragged away by Shade's darkness. But it's like, yeah, how do you fight darkness? And it's like, how you fight shadow? And it's like, well, the only time he ever saw, like, anything done was like he saw Starman incapacitating with the cosmic staff, but other than that, like, which I'm like, that all he was able to do was incapacitate. You would think like the staff would, I guess you would have to like probably go like supernova with the staff to like get rid of him, because you'd have to I mean, but that's also the thing too, light casts a shadow, so it's like, I guess that's why all you can do is incapacitate. Like, how do you like destroy a shadow? You can't. I mean, I guess a bright enough light, but even then, it's like I said, they're light cast shadows. They're like two sides of the same coin. So you into each other's yang type of thing. So I don't know. I'm curious like how that would work. Barbara's encounter with him was pretty scary, especially because it's like she's trying to reach for her phone. He's like, "Oh yeah, technology doesn't work just when you need it the most." And I was like, "Huh." It's interesting. Like, I don't know if that was just like his power of just Shade, like, because what is electronics and stuff like that, and it was a screen do, it lights up, so maybe that's how he was able to do that. So maybe his Shade kind of worked in that regard. But also, like, Dr. Midnight was good with technology, so that's why I'm like, maybe there's something to that. Like, I don't know, just that, like I said, I'm probably like super off base, but I'm just like, that's kind of stuck in my head for now. I'm not saying that is it, but that's something running through my mind. But it was interesting to find out, like, I was like, yeah, like, if you're not with the ISA, like, why are you here? Why now, after all these years? And it turns out he's after Eclipso. And I'm just like, the moment he's looking for it, he opens the little box and he's gone. I was like, oh. I was like, so that's what you're after. Why? I guess because maybe it took him a long time to head to Blue Valley because he found out William was dead. Maybe it's that he was actually just waiting. He's like, oh, the ISA is taken care of? I'll just sneak in, because he knew that if he... Probably he knew it would be too much trouble if he came back while the ISA was active doing it. He's like, I'm going to stay out of whatever they're doing. I don't care. Maybe it's not till well after the fact of all that was dealt with last season that he found out, wait, Eclipso is... Oh, Eclipso. Like, he's there with William's stuff. Maybe, I don't know. But it's super scary at how sinister he was when he was just like, oh, and I thought we were going to get along swimmingly, and the entire room gets pitch black. I was like, oh, that's scary. So that's interesting. What I also thought was just a nice little scene was the fact is like Courtney and Yolanda being in school, because it's like, what do we do with the Shade? Like, what do we do if we do it incapacitating? Because Yolanda's worried, like, I don't want a brainwave thing to happen again, and Courtney's like, it won't. Like, I'll make sure we'll stop him. But also I love that she ended up getting the question right, and it's like, Yolanda's like, how do you know? She's like, yeah, history's actually pretty easy when you actually read. You know, I was like, oh, that's kind of a neat moment. But it's also that thing with Yolanda and the headaches. I'm like, I think Brainwave left a psychic imprint in her. Like, in some shape, like, he might still be alive. Like, he might have literally be living in her head rent-free, and, like, having another consciousness on some level exist in your head might be what that's about. I can only assume. Because she did say, like, when he died, like, she felt kind of like his voice in her head or something like that. So it was like, I think he left a psychic imprint. But would that necessarily manifest? Will that be him, like, reviving himself inside of her and completely overtaking her consciousness and taking over her body? So maybe it's something of that nature. It's just the headaches and everything. Like, so I'm thinking that's going to eventually build up to that. That's all I can surmise. I mean, I'm sure, like, her guilt over it isn't going to help. I think that might actually lower her defenses and might make it easier for him to eventually take over her if that's the direction they're going. So that's something to kind of keep an eye out for. But obviously for Mike, it's like, you know, he's always wanted to be part of the ISA, and now he can be. Thunderbolt chose him, and it's like, with this, I can actually, I can help you guys. Courtney's like, I get it. It's like, I might be the leader of the JSA, but like, Pat's your dad. He's the one that gets final say in this. But it's also like, come on, like, I always thought about like, you and me, brother and sister, and I was like, oh, that's really sweet. Just being like, shut up, brother and sister, kicking, taking down bad guys, saving people. And Courtney's like, yeah, I like that. It's like, all right, leave it up to me. And he was like, oh, Mikey Thunder, and she is like, first of all, leave it to me. Second, that's terrible. But Pat reluctantly accepts his help. It's like, okay, we're gonna, and I love, like, that's a montage of like, all right, we're gonna craft the perfect wish. Like, we're not, this whole thing, like, gotta be careful what you wish for. So they make a specific, I love everyone's doing their part. Like, all right, now what you do this? Like, no, start over. And just like, we're just seeing them like crafting the perfect wish just to find where the shade is. And I thought that was such a neat element, because it's like, right, you do have to think that far in advance on how you're gonna handle it. They get so specific that there's no wiggle room. I was like, I like that. That's such a neat element. And because of the wish, they were able to find the shade, but Mike got relocated to just staying behind. And then obviously them telling Pat telling Barbara the plan. It's like, okay, so Yolanda and Rick are going to like bind him. And then Courtney's going to knock him out with the staff. And then and Beth will come in with like the device to hold him. And it's like, what device? Your old sun tanning bed. The one that was in the garage. She's like, really? And it's just kind of like, yeah. And it's like, yeah. And I love that it is a thing. It is, it is a group effort, because like Courtney's like, and it's like, well, your mom said the plan was adequate. It's like everyone's got to be on board with the plan. Like, this isn't just like, this is a democracy. Everyone has a vote in this circumstance. I thought that was pretty dope. But they end up confronting the shade, which really quickly, maybe this came up in season 1. I didn't remember that. I mean, it's just Rick's natural, like, he can be like, very like, ugh, but like him being like, oh, it's like, oh, this place is history. Yeah, the shade is going to be history when I get my hands on him. Courtney's like, what does that even mean? He's like, I don't know, I'm amped. I was like, oh, maybe, because I think, to be fair, it's like, I think it's just because he was always kind of like that already. I didn't realize, like, maybe they brought it up in season 1 and I just don't remember that, like, basically when he, like, uses the hourglass, he's basically roid raging, that he's kind of like, he's amped, like, he just gets, like, he gets, that's why I was like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't remember that being a conversation last season. Maybe it was, which I just, either way, I thought that was fascinating. But yeah, they confront the shade, and the shade's kind of like very like gentlemanly, like, and just being like, oh, hey, yeah, take a seat. Pat Dugan, I should have known. And I love Pat being like, you do realize I didn't actually know what that car was. And he's like, yes, Pat. He's like, okay, just almost like, I want to make sure you know that I know my cars. But it's like, yeah, talking about the fact that he, he's in Blue Valley for his own reasons. It's like, I love that whole conversation. Like, yeah, the only thing, he's like, oh, like, he didn't agree with Jordan or any of them. He's like, something worse than someone trying to take over the world, it's someone trying to save the world. So he's like, I have no interest in any of that, but I have my own motivations for doing what I'm doing. Other than that, he's not really talking about it, because he's like, yeah, what I want, it's best you just don't know. Is it because he actually is worried that, like, if they knew, they'd go running after Eclipso, I think. Because even at the very end of the episode, he's like, he's going to kill those kids, and he's worried. That's what makes me think, like, that isn't just a shade. I think that might be Chuck somewhere underneath all of that. I could be wrong, but he hasn't presented himself as given the opportunity. I mean, if the ISA, the moment they had an opportunity, it's like, if they could kill any one of them, they would have taken a chance, but he didn't. But also shows you how powerful he is. Like, none of you could do anything. The staff could barely do anything, because, like, he was able to kind of constantly, like, dim the light of the staff with, the shadow, but everyone got taken down immediately. It's like, yeah, without even like putting forth much effort, he was able to kind of knock everybody out. Mike did try to come through to help with Thunderbolt, but Thunderbolt immediately got taken out. So the shade ended up getting away. He's like, once again, last warning, stay out of my way. Then we had that interesting conversation with Yolanda and Mike, where like Yolanda's kind of asking him about like, right, the whole icicle thing. He's like, right, I was just driving really fast, and there he was, and he burst into like a whole bunch of ice cubes. Like, I didn't even know what happened before it was done. It's like, she's like, wait, so it was an accident? He's like, oh, I guess it was. Because I thought she probably thought she could get some insight. It's like, right, if I can figure out how Mike's dealing with it, but it's not like Mike didn't do it on purpose. It was an accident. He's like, oh, crap, he was just in the middle of the road, like I was already going too fast. It wasn't like he did it on purpose. So, but her situation is, it's like, so he didn't think much of it. It's just kind of like, oh, like I just accidentally hit him, and just like, so the guilt's not necessarily there, because it's not like, the difference is Yolanda, she intentionally killed. There was intent behind her killing Brainwave. It wasn't an accident, like with Mikey and Icicle. So she thought she could get some answer to it, like, and like having someone else really like, oh, like someone else went through what I went through. But it's like, no, his circumstances are different, which I think they kind of do skate around that, because it's like, right, because he did take out Icicle, and Pat was like, yeah, try not to think about that. It's like, yeah, he did kind of kill someone, but also it's like, right, he shattered into Icicle pieces, so I guess like that's how you kind of dance around that, but he did kind of kill someone. But I don't know. It was also like, I think that was probably even in Yolanda's mind, that's more of self-defense, because that was when Brainwave was tricking her and trying to pretend to be Henry, and she ended up just like, obviously like slashing his throat. So it's a little different. But obviously, Mike feeling really bad. He's like, right, I let you down. And he's like, no, I should have listened, and I let you down. He's like, I wish this pen were in better hands. And Thunderbolt goes, I was like, oh, that sucks. But I think Mike, I think he is in the comics. I think he does follow like Pat's. Like, I think he becomes like I think he does eventually become the one that rides Stripe. I think that eventually becomes his inheritance. He already thinks that way. I haven't really read too deeply into like Mike's character for the comics, so, but I think it's more line of like, yeah, I mean, maybe he does his own thing, but I think he does eventually take up Stripe, but maybe not. I think it's so interesting how they've set up so much like JSA stuff that they're immediately like sending off as like, okay, we got everything with Green Lantern's with Jenny last episode with Green Lantern's daughter, but she's like off doing her own thing, and the pen ends up in someone else's hand. So it's like a lot of this JSA stuff is scattered around. That I think they're setting up pieces of like, okay, it's scattered around, but eventually there's going to be times later on when we're going to need the entire squad to team up, and I think that's what they're setting up. It's like, yeah, moving pieces are being scattered around, but you know, because it seems like Thunderbolt found a new friend, and you know, and it's like. And maybe this is the best hands for it to be in, you know. So it's gonna be interesting to see how. I don't think we've seen the last of any of that, like, you know, Thunderbolt or the whole situation with Jenny, you know, being the new Green Lantern. But I think it's interesting though, is I think it is that thing of like, this is how things were meant to play out too, because now Pat is aware of like, right, like Mike is feeling so alone, but you know, Barbara's like, yeah, we're all part of it, but he, you know, it's okay, like we're all part of the team, like him and me. We might not have like code names or costumes, but we're all a part of this. But she's the one that kind of informed Pat about what he was looking for, and it's like, oh, it's the what was it, the dark diamond, the black diamond, something like that. Reference Eclipso. So he's like, yeah, it's really bad news. So now he knows what. He knows what the Shade was looking for, but also now he knows. Well, because that might be indicative too that is Chuck, because the little girl that got killed at the beginning of episode, was that episode 1? Yeah. That might be why he's trying to get Eclipso, trying to get revenge. So that might be clarification that there's some, whatever the circumstances, that might be clarification. Like some of those pieces line up to make me think that isn't just the Shade anymore. Why they went separate ways, because Chuck took over. But especially because like his final message to Beth was like, hey, like I don't know who you are, but the Eclipso is here. So, but also it lets them know like, well, if it wasn't there, that means that someone else has Eclipso, so like it sets that in motion. So it's like, okay, so I thought that's also something to know, like, okay, if the Shade doesn't have it and it wasn't a part of William's stuff, that means someone else does. So I'm curious, will this eventually lead to the whole Mike situation? I don't know. Things might be it might not be as easy to get to Mike as Cindy might have wanted. Maybe it still will be, but it is the thing of now that now that Pat is more aware, he is probably going to make more of a conscious effort to make Mike a part of all this so he doesn't feel alone. Because yes, they are a family, they are a team, both just in a normal family sense, but also in a superhero sense. We're in this together type of thing. So that's definitely going to be interesting. But other than that, was a nice conversation between Rick and Beth. Because obviously for Beth, like, she wanted to get justice for Dr. Midnight, just like everyone else is able to get justice for the respective people that they've taken up the mantles of. And so for her, she feels like she's failing on that front. The shade got away, plus everything going on in her personal life. So she ends up confiding in Rick, because Rick is like, just pretend I'm Chuck. And she's like, my parents are getting divorced. She's like, a paper is paper. Like, nothing's like set in stone yet. So like, talk to them and find out. He's like, if I could, I would talk to my parents, So I thought that's kind of a nice moment between them. He's also keeping his secret about, because he was like, yeah, I was off feeding a dog, and Yolanda's like, when did you get a dog? And he was just kind of like quickly dodging that subject. It's like, oh, not letting anyone know about the Grundy situation. So that was interesting. Like I said, a lot of interesting things set up in this episode. I'm really curious to ultimately see where everything ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.